Today I will show you how to save at least 150 bucks on a lens that I used for 6 years, and it is 8 years old and it's still very good. And you can see even on B-roll my 50mm f/e 1.8 Sony full frame lens, how tired it is, how bad condition it is. So if you ever see my announcement anywhere there on Craigslist or anything like that, just don't buy from me, because those lenses are heavily used. However, you can save a lot of money on buying this lens, because for example nowadays, I checked it right now on B&H, you can buy this lens for 198 bucks, and its competitor, close competitor from Viltrox, 50mm 1.8, costs over 300 bucks. So that's a big saving, and I will show you in this video that this lens still up to today can perform very well and can do commercial jobs. Okay, 50mm 1.8, this is like a standard lens. So when this lens was released, this was something fresh, something new. Because like old 50mm 1.8 lenses were plastic, were like usually like, you know, we're making strange sounds, and like the sound of the autofocus system sounded like a drill on, you know, low rotation. Here, this is different. So we have a lens that was really like a step between the old times of cameras with like mirror and DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. This lens is better made. It's still plastic, but it's lightweight, and despite my 6 years of heavy usage, is still alive, and the focus ring is larger than it was before, and it still works pretty good. The autofocus system, of course, could be better because it still sounds a little loud for nowadays standards. But I gotta say that if you pair this 50mm lens with A7 Mark III or A7 Mark IV or any modern Sony body, it gets like second life when it comes to autofocus, because when you put it on A7 Mark I or II that I used to use on, well, there was a little bit of searching, you know, this it's pretty much non-existent on A7 Mark III and completely non-existent on A7 Mark IV. So these cameras put second life into this pretty old lens. But let's talk about optical quality for nowadays standards. Is it still good? So when you take a look at sharpness at 1.8, it is pretty sharp. It is not razor sharp, but it is sharp. In corners the sharpness drops, but obviously 1.8, you won't need a lot of sharpness in the corners, because if you want something to be sharp all over the picture, then usually you stop it down to a 5.6, let's say, and this is where this lens shines, because at 5.6 it's razor sharp, both in the center and on the corners, and the vignetting disappears. So when we talk about vignetting at 1.8, it's pretty large. However, it can be removed in post-production, so nothing to be scared of, in like nothing to deter you from buying this lens. Anyways, long story short, let's talk about work against harsh light. So against harsh light, you can see some flaring there and some drop in contrast, which is obvious because it's a cheap 1.8 lens. And you can see a little bit of purple fringe around lens flaring around the flare, but it's still nothing really bad. So if you want something, some improvement in optical quality of this lens, definitely invest in one of the cheap Chinese lens hoods for that lens, and that should help you to avoid some extreme flaring. But in any case, this is nothing shocking. I've seen like this kind of flaring on expensive lenses, so this lens still is producing quite a decent image, both against the light and just testing its sharpness. Now let's talk about the distortion. Distortion is pretty non-existent on this lens, which is a good news because there's no barrel effect, no pincushion effect. The lines are pretty straight. The other category in which this lens is pretty okay is chromatic aberration. So when you photograph something like in a close-up, like text, the chromatic aberration is not there. There is a little bit of, not a little bit, a lot of purple fringe if you take photos against a very harsh light. So in extreme conditions you can see purple fringe. Then nowadays in post-production can be easily removed, and there's not big of a deal, but there is a purple fringe, which is something characteristic to this lens because there was also a purple fringe in around the lens flare, sorry. This English language, so difficult for me. Now, continuing our test autofocus system. So, as I said, when you put it on A7 Mark III or A7 Mark IV, in this case I put it to A7 on A7 Mark III just to make it a little bit more like, well, it's a very popular camera, so to show you like how that lens would perform maybe on your A7 Mark III if you already own it. So it performs okay. There is some surge, there is some pump, but the autofocus system is pretty much on face or on the object you really want it to be, and it's pretty fast, a little bit loud, so for videographers something to take a notice of. And there's also like focus breathing that is noticeable when you use it in manual mode, but it's just a little bit of it. So honestly, it's totally okay for video work unless you expect something high-end, but if you expect something high-end, you don't look at this lens, period. So all in all, this lens is pretty interesting. The only thing, my only conspiracy theory is that it is an older construction maybe, because the back lens, the back glass is pretty far from the mount. So maybe this is something from the old times, repackaged for the new times. I don't know, but that's just a theory. But all in all, both on photo walks, on the street, this lens performs pretty well, which you can see on the samples, and I enjoyed using it. It's very discreet, very stealthy, very light, and so very good. And I also use this lens a lot in my professional work. Okay, I have more high-end lenses with 1.4 light, and that's true, but I still use it when I need, like, for example, 250mm lens on 2 cameras. I still use this lens, and I use it on many weddings, like engagement sessions, family sessions, portrait sessions, which you can see on the samples. So the separation of the object from the background is pretty good on that lens. When talking about separation from the background, I gotta say something about bokeh or bokeh. So the bokeh, French, is not very pretty on this lens, let's face it. It's a cat eye effect, there's a little bit of onion, but there's not a lot of mess, visual mess in bokeh. So all in all, it performs okay. So, conclusion. In most of cases, this lens performs okay, and this is good enough to justify purchase of it, because it's a great entry-level like prime lens. So if you want to try prime lenses, and if you've been thinking, okay, should I get it or not, this lens is still pretty decent purchase. There is Viltrox 1.8 on the market, which is also a very good purchase. In many cases, it's better. However, I gotta say that this lens survived with me, heavy user, 6 years, which is a good testimony to its durability. So if you're looking for a cheap lens, still, despite it's being 8 years old, it's still a good choice, and you can a lot of times find it bundled with A7 III or 7 IV cameras in many shops, or you can also buy it used for like half of the price. And this lens can give you an entry, a beautiful entry to a world of prime lenses if you don't have a prime lens already. I hope you guys enjoyed this little review of 50mm old and actually shockingly good lens for its year, for its age. If you did, please leave thumbs up, subscribe, and I see you guys in the next one on my channel.